Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Zorro Special Prep Natural Processed Panama from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Manhattan, based out of Rotterdam, Netherlands. And if this coffee sounds familiar, then that is because we did review it a couple of years ago, and I enjoyed it so much that it finished third place in our top 10 coffees of 2021 list. This year's version does offer a slightly different processing method as well as flavor profile, so it'll be interesting to see how it compares to the previous version of this coffee, as this right here is day 42. And recipe we went with for this coffee is similar to our standard Manhattan recipe. We went 16:1 in the water to coffee ratio, brewed at 210 degrees Fahrenheit, so a little warmer than normal. And I like this one best through the V60, which typically indicates a more medium fine grind. However, I went a little bit more fine on this one as well. Now, roast profile for this coffee, usually I say it's a little difficult to tell with special processed coffees, but this one isn't difficult by any means. This is a very light coffee. You can tell right from the onset, especially the way it brews, that this is a very light coffee in general. So that's what we'll go with for the profile, very light. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and the cup itself did yield a wild aroma that radiated so many tropical fruit components right from the brew. And immediately present within the cup itself was this slight kind of light aspect to it and also a little uneven. So there was an additional grainy quality present within the cup, and I felt that there was so much potential based off of just brewing this coffee. However, that first impression didn't necessarily yield similar results to the aroma that was coming from the brew. So I honestly felt like it was me. However, one thing I do want to mention is that grainy quality that I did experience in the cup on that first day. I think it's one thing if it's possible I might have brewed the coffee wrong. However, this is present in the whole beans as well as in the aroma of the coffee itself. So I think it's one of those things where it just does have this kind of slightly cereal grain quality present within the coffee, and that's not something that I could necessarily work around. It was just present. It might be attributed to the listed vanilla note, but we will continue with this coffee. Day 17, ran it through the Chemex, and there was still more of that slight grainy quality, as it did come out a little bit more clean than the V60. There was a little bit more of the listed passion fruit, and it complemented the tropical citrus well. So I did like this coffee better on the second day, but still getting too much of that grainy component to kind of contrast the more vibrant citric fruit aspects. Day 20, back through the V60, lower temperatures, and that was an attempt to kind of reduce the grainy quality, but it was still there. And in addition to that, it did kind of lower the tropical vibrancy, so this was definitely not the way to go with this coffee. At this point, I was struggling with it a little bit. I was kind of expecting maybe a coffee that was a little easier to work with, but when I kind of think back on it, it was the other Zorro that I also had a little bit of difficulty working with, so we're going to continue with this coffee and see what else we might be able to get. Day 23, ran it through the April dripper, and this is the best the coffee had been to this point, as there was a lot less of that grainy aspect present through this brew method. In addition to that, it was replaced by a cleaner tropicality and the complementary sweet vanilla components to it. I think I mentioned that in previous Panamanian Geisha reviews that Panamanian Geishas have had a lot more of that kind of sweeter, creamy vanilla aspect to them recently. So that's something I was liking, even if it did have a little bit of that grainy quality to it as well. It was reminiscent of a tropical smoothie for me on this day, but it was the best day I'd experienced of this coffee to this point. Day 27, the cup feels like it's kind of improving on its own. So I went back to increasing the temperatures, actually even went a little higher than normal and went a little bit more fine with the grind, and there was a lot less of the graininess present within the cup. Now, even on this day, as I'm smelling the whole beans and the grounds, it's still there, so I don't think it's something that I could ever really truly get rid of. However, it was a lot less prominent on this day as there were more of the tropical forward components in a more moderately defined manner and a sweeter cup in general. So thinking sweeter tropical fruits, but nothing necessarily that I would point to as being overly defined yet. Day 30. Best day of the coffee to this point, as the cool down really does seem to help, and the coffee is at its best after you've let it cool down a little bit above room temperature. I'd say somewhere halfway between after it's been brewed and room temperature. You're getting a lot more of those vibrant aspects, really sweet in the cup. The graininess is all but gone as you do let it cool down. Wonderfully creamy vanilla-like aspect present again in this coffee. And it's feeling a slight bit of the Fruity Pebble aspect, and that's that kind of citric grainy quality that I really enjoy in Panamanian Geishas, and I experienced it on this day and this day alone, but every so often I get it from one of these coffees. Day 33, the cup continues to see a fair bit of improvement as it's starting to clear up a little bit more with a heavier focus on the bright tropical fruits. So I think this coffee is one that with even more time, it's probably going to get better. It just seems to be increasing in terms of the sweetness, the tropical fruit vibrancy with less of the graininess. So my best suggestion for this one is maybe some extended rest. Plenty of ripe pineapple at this time, so at this moment I would say that there's a much more defined flavor profile present within it. Additional citric aspects present in the finish, including that listed vanilla from previous days, much more present, much more pronounced in the cool down. Day 36, not much of a change as the graininess is a little bit more pronounced at this time, but that's of course during the warmer temperatures. As it does cool down, it does skew a lot more in terms of that fruit sweet direction. Ripe pineapple continues to remain the most dominant characteristic. I think the other fruit that they have listed on here is passion fruit, and I could see that, but for me it was much more of a sweeter tropical citric component that really seemed to dominate this cup. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and we have 3 level 5s, so let's go through those real quick. The finish, level 5. Yes, it does leave a very tropical finish within the cup, and that's something that you can feel for quite a bit. And given that the sweetness is also very high in this coffee, you are tasting the vibrant tropical components in this one for quite a bit, and that also goes in line with the citrus fruit, which is at a level 5. And towards the end, I said it was a lot more of a ripe pineapple, and that was the most defined aspect for me within this coffee, especially towards the end. So I would say those 3 things kind of go hand in hand with each other. It does have a very sweet citric finish to the cup, which is quite nice. It's probably my favorite part of this coffee. A couple of level 4s. The acidity level 4. I mentioned at the start this is a very bright cup of coffee, and I don't know if it necessarily helped that I continued up the temperatures and was getting a lot more of the brightness from it. But I had no issue with that. As I always say, as long as the sweetness is in equal or greater measure than the acidity, then I will at least be able to stomach the strong acidity that can be present in the coffee. So level 4, definitely agree with that. Berry fruit, level 4, and that's kind of the secondary characteristic that they have listed on here is that passion fruit. And interestingly, given that I've had some coffees recently that had very defined passion fruit flavor notes, I'm thinking that Latte Lino from Say, as well as the El Obraje from the Barn. This one didn't necessarily have it in as quite a defined manner or as pronounced of a manner, but it was something I could feel probably with a little bit of the priming effect thinking about it, as it was definitely nowhere near as pronounced as the more citric components to this. Stone fruit level 3, I could definitely see a slight bit of some sugary stone fruits, as this was just a very tropical cup of coffee in general, so I feel like you were getting at least a little bit of the kind of brighter colored fruits in general. Body level 3, yes, it does have a fair bit of body, a little atypical for Panamanian geishas, but I think this might have to do with the processing method that this coffee went through, so I can definitely see it being there at that level 3 mark. And then the last thing we must discuss, and that is the cleanliness at the level 3. And that was going to be the big factor in how much I enjoyed this coffee. So I toyed with the idea of putting out the 4, but I have to be completely fair, and given that the grainy quality was present for so much of this coffee, as well as a less defined flavor profile for the duration of it, I really couldn't justify that level 4. It's not quite as clean as the more standard wash processed coffees. Even if it does have a little bit more clarity than a lot of natural processed coffees, I feel like best I could do is higher side of this level 3, but at the end of the day, it was very much in that level 3 category. I think for the most part, that's about it on this tasting wheel. I don't think there's anything else worth discussing, and it's pretty similar for both brew methods, although I think just a little better through the V60. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, and I have to be as fair as possible about this coffee, and what it reminds me a lot of is the El Obraje, which was one of my favorite coffees of last year. That coffee finished 5th place, and that was because it had a very clean and defined flavor profile to it. This coffee feels similar in that aspect, however, a lot less of the clarity and a lot less of the florality, while at the same time still having a lot of the more vibrant tropical fruits to it. It was one of those things where I liked that coffee because of the cleanliness as opposed to the very strong wild tropical fruit components to it. So there are positives to this. It is a very sweet coffee. It has a lot of the fruit components that I do enjoy. However, it's still lacking 2 of the major factors that I really do enjoy, and that's of course going to be the clarity and the florality. So for that reason, I didn't enjoy it as much as the previous version of the Zorro. However, I did enjoy this coffee quite a bit. It still had a nice sweet fruit component to it that made it a very pleasant drink throughout the entire duration of drinking it. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though, is somebody that enjoys their really, really sweet coffees, because this one was pretty sweet in general, especially in terms of the fruit sweetness. And there are so many different kinds of sweetness that you can experience from coffee in general, and this one definitely skewed a lot more on the fruit sweet side of things. So that's the first direction I'd point you towards. It does have a little bit of complexity, as you do get a little bit of all of the fruit factors, a little bit of the berry, a little bit of the stone fruit, and in addition to that, it has had that vanilla-like quality that I've experienced from a fair bit of Panamanian geishas recently. And I feel like if you could work through this coffee, maybe you could get a little bit more of that kind of fruity pebble aspect, because if you can find a way to couple the things that are present, citrus, vanilla, and that grainy quality, into making it feel a little bit more like the fruity pebbles, then it's something that, in theory, I probably could have enjoyed a little bit more. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Zorro Special Prep Natural Processed Panama from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.